Okay, before we start getting into the first panel on labor aspects of the automotive industry under USMCA, I wanted to bring to your attention the breakout sessions that are taking place in room 206A at the meeting level, starting at 1 o'clock. There's nearshoring opportunities under Mexico's shelter and IMCO programs, and another one on overview of labor law reforms in Mexico and how soft tech keeps automotive rolling. So please feel free to join those breakout sessions during that time. So let's begin with our first panel of the day, labor aspects for the automotive industry under USMCA. And this panel is going to be managed by Francisco Peña, who is the labor partner of Cacheaux, Cavazos, and Newton. Please join me in welcoming him. Francisco. Thank you.
On the microphone? Yes, thank you. So we'll do the official takeoff of the mask. Thank you, Bruce, for the introduction. Thank you, everyone, for taking the leap of faith and being here live. It's been, 18 months or so?
Too long.
It's too long, right? We were talking about it, and we were saying that we needed to be in present and live instead of doing so much Zoom. So thank you for being here. We're going to be talking about the USMCA labor aspects under the USMCA. I'm going to introduce first Raymond Robertson. Raymond is the director of the Mosbacher Institute for Trade, Economics, and Public Policy at Texas A&M University. Also in the panel is going to be with us here, it's somewhere around here. The building's too big, so Manuel will be here. Manuel Molano, he's the former chief economist for the Mexican Institute for Competitiveness, is the IMCO, and we have live, I think, we have live Luis Hernández. He's the president of Mexico National Council of the Maquiladora and Export Manufacturing Industry Index. So we're going to start talking about, in a grand scale, what is the USMCA means for the three countries that we represent in the USMCA. And the first thing I would like to ask you, Raymond, is the workforce in each country a rival, substitute, or do they complement each other? And also, how competitive is the automotive industry in the three North American countries?
Great. Well, thank you very much, Francisco, for the question. It's an honor to be on stage with you and these other distinguished panelists. I would also just like to thank Juan Gonzalez and the team at Mexico Now for this opportunity. I actually started my journey here in San Antonio. I graduated from Trinity University, where as a senior there, I studied NAFTA, and this is before NAFTA was an agreement. And that allowed me to travel to Mexico on a Fulbright to study the evolution of NAFTA. Now, as the director of the Mosbacher Institute, I've continued my research on whether or not U.S.-Mexican workers are complements with each other or whether or not they're competing in labor markets. And this is really the critical question that you were asking, because there is a very significant sense throughout much of the United States that the United States workers and Mexican workers compete with each other for jobs. And there's lots of anecdotal evidence which supports that vision, right? You hear of plants closing up in Michigan and so on to move their production of different vehicles down to Mexico. But as an economist, I had the luxury of stepping back and doing some empirical research where we looked at the employment and wage data monthly as time series and across the different industries, and did some formal tests on whether or not the US and Mexican workers are complements or substitutes. And what these results show us is that on the aggregate level, before NAFTA, there certainly was evidence that US and Mexican workers competed with each other. They were producing similar things. They were competing for jobs. What NAFTA did, as most of you know, was to restructure the automobile industry and manufacturing more generally into an integrated supply chain. And so my other earlier research actually demonstrates that North America is actually one large labor market. It's not separate labor markets. The Mexican labor market and the United States labor market are actually deeply integrated to form one common labor market. So it's really important for us here in Texas, but also in Washington and in Mexico City, to understand that these are not separate labor markets, that these are very deeply integrated labor markets. And this is also emphasized in the results that we produced after NAFTA, which showed that even though before NAFTA, US and Mexican workers were substitutes in that sense, after NAFTA, due to this restructuring and integration, now we have evidence that says, no problem, we're glad you're here. Glad you could make it. Please. Now, after NAFTA, with the restructuring of the global value chains, we see that now US and Mexican workers are actually complements in production. And that means that they're actually producing parts of the same final product, which I know everyone here knows very well, but I'm here to reassure you that that does show up in the empirical data. Now, what does that mean? That NAFTA has been contributing to deepening that integration, and it's really critical right now as we're going forward at this critical moment in time that we don't try to divide these markets. It's really critical for the competitiveness of North America to maintain that kind of integration. So the other part of the question you asked was, how competitive are we? If we are able to get the integration right and stop throwing wrenches into the process, North America is going to be arguably one of the most competitive, if not the most competitive, automobile markets in the world. We have incredibly advanced education coming up in Mexico. The engineering facilities and education, the engineers are great. We've seen a huge increase in Mexican exports, especially they've actually exceeded or matched or exceeded Canada's exports to the United States in both final goods, final automobiles, and automobile parts. And so Mexico has made these incredible strides in the automobile industry, which helped to make the North American automobile industry, which is the way we should think about it, arguably the most competitive in the world.
Thank you, Raymond. Everything has a beginning, and let's hope not an end, with respect to USMCA. Everything began here in San Antonio. And here we are again, the opening of a live audience. And well, this is virtual, but we have a live audience, which I think is pretty cool. It's real cool, I will say that. Manuel, what do you think about what we're talking about, the North America, how competitive is the labor hand between the countries and within the automotive industry?
Well, first I have to apologize for being late. I got lost in the building, so I hope that after I speak, nobody says, man, how lost is this economist? But, I mean, I think that what you just have said is exactly correct. I think we've made great strides as a region. And the key to this is as a region. I don't think we can be as competitive as we've been or as we were during the NAFTA years unless we acknowledge that complementarity of the three countries. Of course, there's always ways to improve. And I think that labor relations, union relations are going to be a big part of that. I don't think that salaries have to be the biggest part of that discussion. I guess that things like quality and conditions of work and work-family balance and that kind of thing will be more a part of that. But I still think we are the most competitive region of the world in producing big-ticket items such as automobiles, planes. I think that there are many signs of that, and maybe later in the discussion we will be able to show some evidence of that.
Thank you. Luis, good morning.
Good morning.
How's the weather over there, by the way?
It is better than Texas.
What can you tell us? What can you tell us about how competitive you think the three countries within the USMCA is?
I think, well, first of all, good morning to everybody. Sorry I couldn't be there. Thunderstorms in Texas, Dallas. Pretty much competitiveness is one of the key elements that we can address at the USMCA. Why is that? There are three main elements for us. First of all, we know each other for a while, okay? when we started NAFTA, the economic relation that we had with the U.S., Mexico with the U.S. was, the closer it gets to 1, the better. We had a 0.10 correlation before NAFTA. After NAFTA, our correlation is 0.75, okay? So there is a strong dependence on the U.S. of what Mexico does and what Canada does, because we understand each other and we have pretty much the same customers and the same, let's say, rationale to purchase cars, okay? So there is one key element there that we know the market, we understand the market, we understand how the market flows. That is one of the elements. The other one is the labor, okay? When everything started, I will use a company, when Toyota moved an operation to Mexico, was pretty much the same when Toyota moved an operation from Japan to the US. It is, the knowledge is there, okay? The transition of knowledge has been a key element on us, the 3 countries, on training based on what we know, based on what we understand, and pretty much the assets that we have in Mexico, Canada, and the US are the same. Okay, so we are kind of pretty much replicating every single aspect of manufacturing. And finally, what I can see is that there is a lot of people and students in the US, Mexico, and Canada that can understand and can help us develop a better, let's say, a better future for what we need on the car industry. What we're seeing right now is that we're moving towards the electric cars, okay? So having that rationale, having that knowledge so close by us, and having been in NAFTA for more than 20 years, tell us a lot of what we can do. And as well, I think one of the best elements for a manager or a vice president of operations, president of the company, is anticipation, okay? So being so close allows to anticipate many of the things that we're seeing. We'll be seeing right now in the next years, this allied shoring that we have been developing is a lot of things moving here, and just us working more together.
Thank you, Luis. Raymond, just to kind of close the gap on this question, should there be an automotive temporary immigration program in the U.S.?
So immigration has really been key to the success of Texas in particular and in the United States more broadly. One of the things I've been doing in my other research is looking at some of the benefits of migration. One of the things that is really important that we're realizing right now throughout the sector is we have a shortage in automotives of these chips, there's supply chain disruptions in the microchips, but also in labor, right? Where businesses across the spectrum are having a really hard time filling jobs that are necessary. And there's lots of people in Mexico who need jobs, right? So to the extent that we can't get these jobs filled and there's going to be opportunities for expansion, I think a much more effective coordinated immigration policy is long overdue, as a matter of fact. Absolutely.
Thank you, Raymond. Manuel, you're in the hot chair now.
Well, I mean, immigration is a very controversial subject, both in Mexico and the U.S. Of course, we need a more comprehensive kind of program. Look at what happened with Britain and the Brexit.
Okay.
It's not that they don't have food or that they don't produce food or import food, but they don't have lorry drivers, because lorry drivers came from Poland. And once the island got out of the European Union, they cannot get enough drivers. And what Raymond just said is quite right. I mean, a lot of people in Mexico do need jobs. I'm not really sure that Mexico is really doing the right conversation with Washington. I guess that. It's not easy. It's not a level field kind of negotiation. But Mexico needs to address this. Of course, if I'd be the U.S., I would say, guys, I mean, 25% of my population is foreign-born. What are you doing? And then you will find out that Mexico has less immigrants than Japan in OECD. So I guess we need a more carrot approach than stick approach. What we've been doing is frankly inhumane. And I guess that if we get there, the U.S. could give concessions to countries such as Mexico that actually do something to place people that need jobs in their own pockets of development, because Mexico is a very a heterogeneous mix of regions. I mean, you cannot compare the prosperous border north and the Bajío in central Mexico with the southern poorer parts of the country. So I guess that's a discussion that's long overdue. And, again, I don't think that's going to create this very weird USMCA illusion that the salary is going to be $16 an hour in Mexico in the foreseeable future. I mean, I hope I can see that, but I don't think my grandchildren will see that. So I guess that we need to keep the discussion framed in the parameters of the things that we can do. And certainly Mexico could be doing a lot more in terms of absorbing migrants from the whole hemisphere, actually.
Thank you. Luis, your thoughts on immigration and maybe an automotive temporary immigration program into the U.S. What do you think?
I think it's going to be natural. And why I say that is there is a lot going on in the car industry, and you guys know better than I. There's a lot going on how to reactivate. I can put it this way: we lost a year in the automotive industry. Okay, there is a year backlog in the automotive industry. Okay, so the further and the faster we want to get to the market with what the customer needs. What we're finding out right now is that people say, you know what, I don't need a new car. I'll keep the one that I have. So many of us have got offers by mail saying, you know what, give me your lease, I'm gonna give you a new car, I'm gonna resell your car. So what we need to understand is that the faster we get to the market and the faster we get to the knowledge of the people, what they really need on the car industry, how can we, let's say, amend or let's say, pass through that year that we lost, it'll be the better. There's a thought process that a guy was telling me, he worked for Tesla. He says, you know what, the car has been is a commodity right now. It has been a commodity for a while, okay? Right now we need to understand is how much can we develop for the user in the car, not in the car per se. Meaning that you need to be understanding what they really need on comfort or what they really need on what the car can give them, besides just moving people from one side to another. And finally, what I believe is that getting this knowledge or having this training, having this immigration, or having people from Mexico moving there or from there moving here, it is a two-sided equation. It is. What I see is a lot of the main industry for Mexico or the U.S. is in Guanajuato, okay? So there is a lot of people commuting from the U.S. to Guanajuato to provide or to give knowledge to employees here. But as well, when we want to do a continuous improvement project or we want to do a Kaizen or something like that, that is when we send the people from the shop floor in Guanajuato to the U.S. so they can understand what truly is the process, okay? The immigration will be there. Unfortunately or fortunately, the immigration from South America to Mexico will continue, and we'll see that continuing. What we're seeing right now is that a lot of the people from South America is trying to go to the U.S. They won't make it because of the border restrictions, because of how we're seeing the border react here. But we need to understand that people that we have here, we need to be trained up there. And in some of the cases, we'll be seeing, as we saw in some of the industries, the Toyota as an example, people on the board that are non-Asia people nor Japanese people on the board. We'll be seeing that more and more in the U.S. automotive industry as well.
Thank you, Luis. Manuel, you just mentioned something key to the USMCA, which was a big issue when it was being negotiated. You said $16 an hour salary in Mexico. Now, you're not going to be seeing it, or maybe not you or your grandkids. What can you tell us about that in specific? how that is going to become an issue if we in Mexico do not comply with that provision within the USMCA?
Well, I guess that the implementation plans will be developed, and this I heard from an industry insider recently, on a company-by-company basis, and each company will have to submit a plan on how they are actually building that up. The accumulation of origin is quite an issue there, because once you can do accumulation of origin, you should be able to comply with the $16 an hour issue. But I guess that right now the Biden administration is not so sure that that actually was accepted in USMCA, while Canada and Mexico are quite certain that it was. So I guess that's going to be a huge discussion. The thing with salary convergence is that it's a slow process, especially in a country like Mexico. When I started studying economics, I was a kid. I was 18 years old. It was 1991, and our teacher, who was the head of ITAM, a university in Mexico City, he was the dean, basically said, I don't think we are going to be able to pull this NAFTA thing. Why? Because our workers make cents of a dollar a day, and the minimum wage in the US is $4 to $8 an hour. So how's it going to happen? Now, if you look at your industry, you're going to find out that the average salary is around $3 an hour in Mexico, which is a sign of convergence. I mean, if we do all the inflation deduction over the last 30 years and so on and so forth, you will find that, well, it's not a big salary, but the convergence is there. The thing is that the convergence is higher in industries where there is less competition, such as steel. In the steel industry, you will find Mexico has salaries of around $9 an hour. So this is a piece of information that unions take and say, hey, I mean, I got a hold of a bit of the political process. I can tell my Congress representative that we don't need any more trade deals, so let's close sectors and let's make huge profits for these companies, and then we can snatch some of those profits and create a higher salary. Well, wrong. That's the wrong way to do it. In fact, I've advocated all my life for a different process, the one where you educate people, where people create skills. When you actually invest more in every labor position, because that's another issue we were discussing in the previous discussions to this panel, the allotment of capital to each worker is crucial to its productivity, and that has an effect on salaries. So I guess that if we can look at this as a bigger thing, as an industry development thing, as something that probably the development banks in the region have to look at, because the allotment of capital is not only the machine I'm working on, it's also the roads that surround me and the industrial park where I'm located, and the public services and the quality of water and so on and so forth. So I think we can make this convergence process happen a lot faster. And now, is it good for the region that we get higher salaries in Mexico or in other places? I think so, because normally the wage, if there are no distortions like the ones imposed by a very politically guided union, when the salary is high, the productivity is high. So I guess we will be paying our workers $10 an hour or $15 an hour whenever they can reach that kind of productivity. But that is not only on the side of the workers. Even if you get the brightest engineer, if he doesn't have the right tools and the right environment, he's not going to be as productive. So I guess that the Mexico competitiveness question is now, and Mexico's proved that it can build competitiveness in certain regions. The thing is how we make that model scalable? You know, how do you create that reality for more companies and more workers?
Thank you, Manuel. Raymond, your thoughts on that? Just give us an overview from your point of view. And let me add a point here. Include Canada, if possible.
Sure. So part of the concern in the USMCA about the $16 an hour was that there was a big surge in exports from Mexico in auto parts and in finished automobile goods. And so, you know, the previous administration in the United States was saying, wait a minute, we have to kind of slow down this shift towards Mexico. But part of, you know, what Manuel was saying was really true, that Mexico's been investing in engineers, they've been investing in technology, they've been investing in capital, and that's why they're able to be so successful in producing auto parts and automobiles, and that is contributing to some wage increases. But you know, Canada at the same time is going through its own kind of a crisis, and there's three crises really that Canada is wrestling with. There's a 2-year crisis, which we all know about with COVID, the supply chain disruptions, the chips, and so on. But also there's a 5-year crisis where they really realize that Canada's on the cusp of having to redefine itself in terms of changing market conditions, like what is going to be the role of electric cars and how does that affect Canada, and also the fact that their comparative advantage lies partially in a wage advantage relative to the United States. So they have like this 30% wage advantage relative to the United States. But also they're relying on an older, more reliable, higher skilled workforce, which means that Canada's competitive advantage, if we let the market play out, has got to be in investing in new technologies and implementing kind of the sourcing for electric vehicles, which requires different things. And part of the thing that I think is really interesting is that, you know, Mexico has been making those investments in many ways. And so I think Canada's very concerned and the United States is very concerned. But just to clarify, I think there's something about the USMCA that might be underappreciated, that the $16 an hour clauses apply to less than half of the value of the vehicle, right? So there still is lots of room for even Mexican production, even when there isn't those kinds of high wages, right? So the idea wasn't to have everyone getting paid $16 an hour. It was really more, can we try to claw back some of the production that has been shifted to Mexico back to the United States with this clause? And you know, as someone from the Mosbacher Institute, Texas A&M, you would imagine we would advocate for letting the market kind of sort this self out, right? I mean, the market should be really the one driving this instead of policy. And I think that if we're letting the market do that, we're going to see those changes that Manuel was saying in terms of rising wages. So does that?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Luis, in taking into consideration what we just heard and knowing the industry that you know, how you know it, and the well you know it, what is your approach in regards to the automotive industry, the $16, the labor value content? How do you think, because we have a factor in Mexico. If I'm making $16 an hour and you're not, you're going to complain to your union because I'm doing it and you're not doing it. So my salary increment is going to reflect also an increment, maybe not as much as mine, but you have to be reflected as well. Otherwise, we're going to have a crisis within the plant.
Right.
So what do you envision in that sense, Luis?
Question, thank you. What I see is this is not a policy situation. This is a productivity and economy situation, okay? We cannot define that because it says that we need to pay $16 an hour, it needs to be that way. What happens here is that we need to understand the formula that we're using to get into that $16 an hour. Because at the end of the day, it's not for an individual, it'll be for a process. If we go to specific companies, through Mexico, many people is doing right now, many technicians are doing $16 an hour. So that means that we can do it, but a lot depends as well on the cost of living, and that is why on the economy or microeconomy there. What I'm seeing right now is that it won't be a standardized, okay, that 16%, that $16 per hour, it will be kind of a blended average, it won't be standardized. Some of the processes, some of the technicians, some of the quality people, engineering people, the shop floor. They're already making that in some of the key industries that will be that supply already to the US and Canada. As you mentioned as well, is having that standardized that creates or open another situation in which everybody will say, you know what, we need to be, we need to make the same. So that doesn't work that way. So that is why it's a productivity situation. Having this $16 an hour as a thought process that everybody needs to be making $16 an hour, I don't think that is the right way. At the end of the day, it will be a productivity driven in specific areas, because some of the areas they won't make it in that way. And the other thing that we're seeing is that the companies and that those $16 an hour is based on what the union, what the 401k, what the tenure of the employees in the U.S. So there is a lot of, economic factors, as Manuel was saying, that need to be embedded in this calculation. What I see is that we'll be there because of the automation, the capital that as Manuel was saying, the capital that the employees will be using will be part of that equation. So the more capital that we invest, the more technicians that we will need, the more education that we will need. So it'll be kind of progressive, but it won't be like just a policy that says you just pay it, because it won't be productive for USMCA.
Thank you. So Manuel, back to you. In your experience, how are companies educating themselves and training their workforce on the labor value content rules to maximize competitiveness and comply with the USMCA regulations? Because at the end of the day, you cannot expect this if you don't train your force. And in order to train your force, you will be doing precisely that, complying with the USMCA.
That's a good question, and I guess that question is kind of political. I know that.
Thank you.
We like to think of the economics and the productivity side of the equation, and that's fine because we are economists and business people. But there's a lot of politics involved in that. I don't think Mexico has done anything in the current administration in order to comply with the USMCA. I think it's pretty much lost in some weird cloud of the policy realm, and simply the public discussion's not there. However, some things have been done, not as a main policy issue, but as a state kind of thing, as a company by company kind of thing. Mexico has been very enthusiastic of the German model of learning through working and the dual system. And I see that happening in Mexico over the next decade. I mean, I don't think we can put every Mexican into engineering or even into a short technical career path of automotive production, but certainly we can do more like the Germans, where people spend some time in education, some time working, and that way they achieve increasing qualifications to do the jobs. The thing now is that what I question myself, and I know we're not supposed to talk a lot about this because this is going to be covered in the innovation panel later on, but I guess that the car of the future is going to be less labor intensive. And we need to acknowledge that as an industry. We need to think how we're going to adjust labor forces to that phenomenon, because the electrical cars that are in the future are a lot simpler. They're a lot technically simpler. They require less mechanical parts, less assembly, and that's something that we really should be thinking of as a region. Maybe if I'd be NatBank, maybe the infrastructure of the future is not only roads and bridges and that kind of thing. Maybe we need to be buying patents. Maybe we should be in the market for companies that are underwater in Asia producing solar technology or producing battery technology, so we can preserve the competitiveness of the industry. I think that intellectual capital, patents, knowledge for this new computer with wheels that we used to call a car is going to be quite something, and it's going to change the composition of the labor force. And I guess that's not only an issue for Mexico. I guess that's an issue for Canada and the US too. We really need to think differently about the kind of product that we will be selling in the market over the next 10, 20 years.
Thank you, Manuel. Luis, let me kind of like do the same thing, but more focusing into the, you represent a key sector to the Mexican economy. And based on your experience, the labor value content rules, how does that, you seen, is the companies working and training their people? Are they just ignoring them as the government is, as we just heard? Or are they doing and being proactive in order to comply with the new rules under USMCA?
Yeah, the short answer there, and I will elaborate on that, is they are working on the compliance side, okay? They are not waiting. One of the key elements from the industry that I represent in Mexico, the manufacturing side, is that we don't wait for policy to dictate what we need to do. At the end of the day, we know what we need to do, okay? So we need to be ready when it comes, okay? What we need to understand as well, and I'll go to your specific question, is that I don't want to get too philosophical or technical here, is based on one of the main premises of the automotive industry, that it is a pull, as we call it, is a pull process. Whoever who orders, we create it, okay? Policy is a push process. You need to do this, okay? So they don't talk to each other. They are kind of differentiated there. So what we're seeing here is that this labor content, this regional value content, we're working towards it. The amount of the investment that the companies are doing in Mexico is high. Just an example, every single year, foreign companies invest in Mexico like $5 billion on assets, okay? This year we have invested, they have invested around $9 billion right now, okay? So answer your question, yes, they are doing something. They are preparing themselves because they need to fulfill a market that was shy for a year. Number two is we need to understand as well is that anticipation that we're doing is not connecting the dots with the Mexico federal government, because the Mexico federal government, they are working towards kind of how do I control this rather than how do I create an area so they can work more and then we control them, okay? So it is kind of, that is what is happening right now. What we're seeing as well is that the training that we're getting of the employees is not a different training to what they will get in the US, Canada, Japan, or Europe. It is pretty much the same training because it's the same car. And at the end of the day, we're talking about a supply chain, okay? So if something on the supply chain doesn't work, if something on the value content doesn't work, it doesn't work for the full car, so the car is not done. So that is why I concur with Manuel, is we're doing what we need to do. We're not waiting. When the time comes to comply, we'll be ready to comply. What we're seeing right now is that the government moves a lot slower than us.
Thank you, Luis. Raymond, your thoughts on the labor value content on the USMCA?
Sure. I mean, I'd like to pick up on something that Luis just said, which is important. In studying the Mexican and North American automobile industry, and the labor contribution in particular, which has been my field, one of the changes that we've seen in the last 5 to 10 years is that Exactly what Luisa said. I wanted to emphasize that the training now that the Mexican workers are getting and the type of jobs that they're doing are becoming more and more similar to the training that American workers have had. So they are becoming kind of more similar in that sense. And I think Mexico has done a really good job of sort of catching up to that level. I mean, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, there was a lot of different kinds of jobs being done. But now there is sort of this complementarity, and that's going to raise that labor value within the industry in a very important way, and hopefully that would contribute to rising wages. But Mexico's strategy is also very different than the United States or Canada. Both Mexico and Canada export 80% something of all production that they have. The United States basically produces for the domestic market. But Mexico is diversified tremendously, and so they have Japanese investment coming in that does produce for the Mexican market, but they have German investment coming in that produces for the European market, which has this very different model. And then there's obviously some North American, United States investment coming in to produce for the American market. But those German models are different, and the Japanese models are different, and the increasing presence of European and Asian investment in Mexico, I think, is going to have an effect in the long run in how Mexico thinks about technology and how they incorporate labor into the production process. And I think that's going to really increase productivity, but it reduces the reliance on the US market in some important ways.
So you will say that an employee based on the US that works in one automotive industry and then moves to another one is pretty much based on the American market versus what you've seen in Mexico, that if I'm working with Nissan and then I move to Honda and then I move to GM and then I move to Ford, I'd be learning more of the industry and how the cars work in regards to not just the American market, but the whole market and the world as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's a big difference that Mexico has relative to Canada and the United States. It's because the workers are going to have this exposure to many different markets and many different styles. And so kind of the point I was making, I didn't say it explicitly, but I was hinting at, was that makes this labor content part of USMCA less pressing for Mexico. It becomes less important because now, if you're integrating into either the Asian market or the European market, which are also huge, you don't have to worry about that kind of policy pressure, which is maybe distracting you from economic drivers.
Thank you, Raymond. Luis, yes. You're going to be in the hot seat now.
All right.
This is to the heart of your industry. We're going to talk this. Two topics will be the one topic and a lesson learned. Legitimación de contratos colectivos de trabajo, the legalization of collective bargaining agreements in Mexico. Does that present a threat to a stable labor and employment environment in Mexico in itself? Because only Mexico is doing it. Within the USMCA, the only country that is doing that is Mexico. There's a history behind it that I know. But will that create a hostile environment in Mexico because of that process?
Yeah, let me. That is a hot question. We need to understand, first of all, is that if we're taking just a snapshot right now of the U.S., around of it, only 10% of the U.S. manufacturing it has a union. Okay, so we need to start with that. Okay, so what we're seeing right now is moving towards to legitimation, or kind of a legit contract for the unions that are working in Mexico. What we're seeing right now is that there were two cases, okay? Two specific cases on the automotive industry. Everybody on the audience will know which ones I'm talking about. What is happening right now is that since we have been moving from, let's say, a relaxed union process in Mexico for the past 30, 40 years. Right now, USMCA say, you know what, we need to address this, not 100%. It needs to be addressed in two ways. Is if the company wants a union, or if the company doesn't want a union. So you can have a legit contract if you don't need a union, and you can have a legit contract with a union. So that's one of the biggest differences that we have. It's not that everybody needs to be unionized or has a union within themselves. What is happening right now is that the cases that we're seeing are isolated And the approach from some certain individuals has been very aggressive, that they want to say, you know what, I need to do this gap that will be in 3 years or 4 years, I need to do it now. So what is happening is that they are breaking or they are burning the bridges for some other industries, because the investment, what they say, you know what, the investor would say, you know what, once they get the process aligned, I will start doing it. What is a fact is that when the USMCA was signed, you need to have a legit contract. You need to understand, you need to have a union, okay? Either if your consultant is telling you that it's due on 2023, that is a big difference. Compliance-wise, the USMCA tells you that you need to either have one or not have one. If you have it, it needs to be approved by the employees. If you don't have it as well, it needs to be approved by the employees, not the management or not the manager, not the consultant, whatever. So what we're seeing right now is that is creating more noise than effectiveness, to your question, because we're saying, you know what do I need to do is, well, you need to understand first that this was signed 2 years ago, okay? Mexico-wise, it was signed 2019, okay? So when it happened, okay, you needed to do something, you're not doing it, you are just waiting for something to happen. The biggest concern to your specific question is that we need to be in the automotive industry on top of this, because it is a supply chain situation. If something happens in Canada, something happens in Mexico or the US, the car won't be made, okay? At the end of the day, maybe in Mexico we're doing just a small assembly there, but if there's something going on there, it won't happen. As well, for the suppliers of that automotive industry, we need to be aware that something that can work out there or that can happen there, it could trigger a situation. And finally, what we're seeing is, what I would recommend the audience, or would recommend everybody is that you as a company create a business continuity plan on this situation. Is what will happen is it becomes an issue, okay? Because it's not something that is due, it is due in 2023, but right now, you're doing your Sarbanes-Oxley questionnaire every quarter, okay? And they're saying, you know what, did something change in your company, or did something change in the policy that you need to know? You need to put that there, because it already changed. If we're doing it or we're not doing it, that's a different story.
Thank you, Luis. As a matter of fact, it's based on what you're just telling us, it's created more of a noise, more of an unstable labor environment in Mexico doing this process than creating certainty and being more proactive and productive for the manufacturing facilities. For the audience here and abroad in the digital world, we're going to start with the questions. You have the QR code that you can submit your questions, and submit your questions with your email in case some questions are not answered during this time. The panelists can follow up with your questions. Bruce.
Thank you, Francisco. We do have a few questions from the audience. One has to do with, do you see the U.S. and Canadian unions getting involved in the unionization of Mexico? This can go to any of the response.
I will start with Luis, since he's on the floor, and then Manuel can help us here.
Yeah, they are already involved. They have been involved in the past 2 years. So that is what I was saying is, we need to start looking into this in more detail as a company, not by the consultants. You need to create a scenario. They have been here for a while. They know what we're doing. They know the critical states that the unions are working. They know the critical states and industries that the unions are not working. So short answer is yes, they are here. They understand what we're doing. They understand what we are not doing, and they can create a situation for the supply chain at the end of the day.
Thank you, Luis. Manuel, your thoughts?
I guess that the Mexican Union is undergoing a very difficult evolution. You have to think that these unions came from the early 20th century in a very different political setting, and in many cases became vehicles for dirty politics and extortion. So I guess that's also a lesson that maybe American and Canadian unions can learn. Maybe we should be looking at unionization in Europe to try to learn some things about it. I mean, I recently was reading a paper that shows that Scandinavian unions advocate for more family work balance because they have more ladies in the ranks. So I guess that a union can be a very powerful motivator for things to happen. I think that not only good pay, but also happy, comfortable workers are crucial to the quality of the product, to different possibilities. I think that the Mexican law needs to evolve to bring that competition forward. I think it would be healthy if we could have more international unions going into Mexico. I don't see the law in Mexico evolving as fast as it should for that process to speed up. But again, what Luis said before is crucial. What we need to strive is for the effective right of people to collective negotiation if they feel like they need it. It doesn't mean that every company out there needs to get a union.
Thank you. Raymond?
Yeah, I was the chair of the United States Department of Labor Advisory Committee on Labor Standards and U.S. Trade Agreements. We worked very closely and talked a lot about Mexican labor unions. And one of the things I think people might not fully appreciate is the rapid response mechanism in the USMCA wasn't something that Trump himself wanted, and it wasn't what the Republicans wanted. I mean, this is clearly everything that the United States unions wanted. So the unions in the United States are very much engaged with the independent union movement in Mexico, whether it's informal, it's always very informal, but it's very supportive, right? So the fact that there's going to be a lot of engagement between the Canadian and US labor movement and unions, the independent movements in Mexico, the independent unions, I think has been there for a very long time and should be expected.
Thank you.
Another one of the questions from the audience had to do with the $16 an hour wage. And I guess it comes down to when assuming it comes through, the Biden administration says, okay, that we're going to go through with this. Do you actually see a movement of jobs from Mexico to Canada and the U.S.?
Should I?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I think that was the intent. I think that there would be some change in employment, but I don't think it would be significant enough to reverse the trends in U.S. employment that we've seen over the last, if you look at the last 20 years in manufacturing generally, or in the automobile industry in particular. If you look at the employment trends in the United States for the last 10 years, there was a real resurgence after the great financial crisis, the global financial crisis in 2009. I mean, there was a big increase in U.S. automobile employment, which has leveled off since about 2015, and obviously in the last 2 years has dropped, but that's because of COVID. But is the USMCA's $16 an hour going to claw back a lot of that? I don't think a lot of it is going to get clawed back because, as I said before, the provision is pretty clear that it doesn't say all production has to be made with workers who make $16 an hour. It's a little bit more than half, right? So, or less than half. So it's not even half. So I'm not sure how much of a movement there's actually going to be.
Okay.
Thank you.
Unless someone else.
Another question for you, Raymond, has to do with when you were talking about the integrated labor market. Mm-hmm. Can you give us some description about how that works?
Absolutely. So there's three things that really integrate labor markets, right? So there's trade, which is just the commercial integration, and we have huge amounts of that between the United States and Mexico. And then investment, and we know that there's a lot of investment of U.S. production, not just in automobiles, but in other manufacturing across the border. And obviously migration, right? And so migrants are very much integrating the labor market one way or another. And the way we test that, just to give you some statistics, right? If you look at, and I don't know if you mentioned this, but if you look at the unemployment rates between the United States and northern Mexico, the correlation between those two is over 0.85. I mean, it's extremely highly correlated. The unemployment rates of the economies of northern Mexico and the United States move together. If you look at wage rates, they move very, very closely together. Employment rates move very, very closely together. And as a matter of fact, that correlation between northern Mexico and the United States is much, much higher than the correlation between northern Mexico and southern Mexico. The northern half of Mexico is more a part of the North American labor market, more so than the southern Mexican labor market is with northern Mexico. So it's completely, it is one labor market. There's a border there, but economics doesn't care much about the border.
Correct.
It's very much, we need to think about this as one market.
One of the ways that some of the research that has been done on NAFTA before USMCA was this story of parts tourism, where parts would start in one country, move to another country, go to the third country, and then end up maybe back in the first country, which is a tremendous amount of movement, and I guess gets caught up in all the calculations that have to be done in terms of the origin and that kind of stuff. Do you see that changing?
No, I think we're so deeply integrated now. I think
that's the integrated part.
Yes, that's what we mean, is that, you know, we're producing the same good. We're all together, Mexico, United States, Canada, are producing the same final good. It's factory North America now. It's not separate labor markets. And it's because of this parts tourism. You know, just kind of for fun, I mean, cows do the same thing. Cows start in one country, they move to the other country, they spend some time, they come back across the border, they keep going. So cows are lots of different products. It's not just automobile parts, but we see this across the board, agriculture and manufacturing as well.
It's the only issue that some people have with that story. Of course, it's usually it's all based on low cost and trying to get the best cost. The CO2 emissions of moving all that stuff is dramatic, especially if you're crossing borders multiple times. How do you see that kind of playing out?
Yeah, that's true. That's why I think we're looking at these new technologies for transportation, right? We're trying to find low carbon alternatives, and we're switching to lower fuel emissions, electric vehicles, and other ways. I mean, last night we had an event at the Mosbacher Institute with the president of ConocoPhillips, and he's saying that we're definitely in the midst of this energy transition, and it's really critical that all of us in all sectors, including automotive, really start doing everything we can to reduce CO2 emissions in transport. But I don't mean to talk too much. I know you all have stuff to say. So,
Luis, how do you think the electric industry in Mexico for cars is affecting, is being affected with this USMCA?
Well, it would be affected because most of the cars that we're doing down here is not related to electric industry. The concern that we have and everybody has in the room is the position from the federal president of Mexico on energy and renewable energy. The way I see it and the way many of us see it here is that at the end of the day, as we have been saying, is the car needs to be done, okay? The product needs to be delivered, okay? So we'll shift towards that. At the end of the day, it will be an asset investment. There are some companies, small group of people that are being trained as we speak on electric, let's say, very much on the electric process of the car in the US right now. But we'll be seeing that shifting towards. It is well received by the employees, it's well received by the companies. However, the words or comments from the federal government are not connected to what we're seeing in the near future here.
So we're seeing a disconnect between industry and the Mexican government in its policies.
There is a disconnect. The way they're treating energy in Mexico, federal-wise, is not the right way. I would say it is. Everybody's making progress, not the U.S. Wherever you go, everybody wants to have lowest carbon emissions, moving towards solar panels and everything. So there's kind of a disconnect there. However, the market is asking for something, okay? And when the market asks for something, we need to deliver it. Okay? If not, if we don't deliver it, that's a good part of manufacturing. Somebody will do it, somebody will deliver it, so we need to be on top of this. I'm sure we'll deliver it.
Thank you, Luis. Manuel? Your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm trying to summarize. Imagine that these labor restrictions on salaries get so tough that in the end we end automating fully the production in North America, and we hire no workers. So you would get only executives, and executives in every plant will make more than $16 an hour, and the problem's being solved. I think that's the kind of incentive that we are creating by putting salary numbers in a trade agreement. It's absurd. It's like, imagine Mexico saying that the U.S. loans at 2% a year are illegal because it's too cheap. I mean, how can you get capital so cheap? Well, I don't think that's proper. I think that's part of the competitive advantage of every country. The fact that the average salaries in Mexico are so low is because we have so many unqualified people in the southern Mexico. So that's why the numbers look terrible when you look at the averages. But in the future, because this is a treaty that has a sunset clause and we will be needing to talk about it, maybe we shouldn't be thinking in terms of the dollar price of wages. That's just nonsense. And maybe we should be thinking more of the more crucial integration issues. I mean, if every Mexican company can get access to 2% a year loans or 3% a year loans, then maybe they will be able to do more for the salary of their workers. So maybe the question is not what's the salary, but what's the access of capital, what's the integration of the financial system and the economic system in the country. So I guess that in 5 years, I hope we have better politicians and better people looking at this. Not to tarnish Raymond here, but in the Mexican side, it was awful. In the U.S. side, at the top level, it was awful. So I guess we should be doing it differently in 5 years.
All right, thank you very much.
Well, I guess
Francisco, thank you. Raymond, thank you. Luis, thank you. And Manuel, thank you very much.
thank you, everybody.
Please give them a hand.
This concludes our presentation.